This episode is brought to you by Ardan Labs Education. Sign up today to learn advanced concepts in Go, Docker, Kubernetes, Terraform, and more. Visit ardanlabs.com/education for more information.
Welcome to the Our Labs podcast. Our special guest today, all the way from Thailand, which has me up at 6:30 in the morning. Look at that, right? See the sunrise in Miami. Everybody gets to see that if you're listening to the show. Is Maria Kellis. Maria, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity, and it's wonderful to see you all the way from the other side of the globe. Hi.
You're a really busy person, so this has been hard to schedule, but I'm glad you found an hour to talk to us. So that's awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
So give everybody, I call it the 2-minute sort of elevator pitch on what you're doing today.
Absolutely. So I focus on people, and I come from technology background, so triple MIT degree, Sloan School, Media Lab, the works, and I somehow got interested, and my life has led me to be interested in people. So I am a leadership coach. I focus on creating leaders, but also on self-leadership, because I believe that everything we do starts with leadership. It starts with our ability to take any complex situation and lead through it. So I believe that we each have the ability to be extraordinary, and I like to see the extraordinary in people.
I can't wait to hear your story when that kind of starts happening, because I feel like right now at about, what am I, I'm going to be 50, I'm 54. Well, at least I'll be 54 this year. But anyway, as I get older, I become more interested in people too than all the hardcore technical stuff, which is kind of what this podcast is about, right? It's about
Yeah.
people, not so much the tech that's kind of behind it. So yeah, that's super interesting. And you're in Thailand doing that kind of work right now.
Yes, I am. A long time ago, I decided that I'd rather build a lifestyle. So I'm location dependent. So I kind of pick the country I want to be in. These days is Thailand. I came here about 10 years ago. So I am on year 10 in Thailand. I'm finishing a PhD in, believe it or not, mysticism and spiritual healing, because I got into that stuff and I was like, wow, I know how to do it. And I'd really like to understand how it's done. And after 10 years of studying this, I can tell you very clearly, we as humanity have no clue. We know the beginning, we know the end, and not so much the in between, but at least we can plan.
Isn't it all about the journey anyway, not the destination?
In a sense, I feel that, and and I make fun of myself sometimes. I say that if I had met me 20 years ago, I would probably say, lady, you look like a nice person, but whatever you're smoking might be a little bit too much.
Yeah, yeah.
I used to say that this cannot be possible. This is not possible. This is not doable. And over the years, I have found that whatever I thought was impossible, not only is possible and doable, it's actually how we can create some things that are extraordinary. So, what we call being in the flow is really understanding this ability that we have as humans to do things that are beyond what our logic mind conceives that we can do. Our mind, I think, is a wonderful tool, wonderful. And it's also not the end all be all. And I say this knowing fully well that I spent the first part of my life thinking that the smarter you are, the better for you. And now I realize that the mind is good. It's a good tool. And at the same time, it's limited, very, very limited. It's our imagination that is important. It's our drive. It's our ability to go beyond. And it's our desire to break through barriers that may be constraining us. And what you were saying, it takes maturity. It takes maturity to get there. My journey, and I'll tell you a little bit about my journey. My journey kind of forced me into this path early on in life.
Wait, don't yet,
Oh, oh,
because I'm
oh,
gonna ask
okay,
the questions. I wanna get there.
okay, okay. All
We're
right,
gonna do
I'm
that
not
real quick.
gonna.
No, don't. Yeah. I'm gonna interrupt you at times to stop you because you might go too far, and I want to pick that apart. But I do have one more question before we jump in the time machine. I got one more question. Just because it just popped in my head. I'm sure you know that book, The Promise, right? That little
Mhm.
book that's supposed to. What are your thoughts on that? I bought the book for the 16-year-old. She went into a period of saying no all the time. Everything was no, 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 no. So I tried to get her to start saying yes, 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 yes. And I read like 5 pages of that book. I don't know why I couldn't read. I didn't read more of it, but it feels a little bit like what that book was trying to say, right? You can manifest almost anything you want in your life if you focus on that.
There's many books out there, and I'm not going to specifically talk about this book because there's tremendous work that is being done by many people. One of my personal heroes is I'm trying to remember the name of the book. I was listening.
Yeah. Look
It's
it up.
You Are the Placebo by Dr. Joe Dispenza. So You're the Placebo, that's the one I wanted to. So as I was saying, there's some really great books, and one of them being You're the Placebo. So the idea is that we have inside us the capacity to be extraordinary. When we talk about manifestation, is very misleading to think that it's outside of us. And I say this from a very personal perspective. I went from being the victim, quote unquote, to learning how to be the creator. And I always say that there's 4 steps in between. So step number 1, things happen to me. When things happen to me, I'm the victim. So I'm sitting here and things just happen. Second one is things happen for me. So again, I am the receiver, but this time I feel lucky. Well, which is at least a better way to live your life. It may sound like Pollyanna, but yeah, go for it. Find something that you're lucky. And then the whole Eastern philosophy is I am the observer. So things happen. No good, not bad. It happened. And I believe that the state where I'm going to describe today and where I believe people can truly benefit from being is the last state, which is things happen through me. I am the creator of the destiny. And when we talk about manifestation, it's not so much about pulling rabbits out of a hat, creating miracles, as it were, but it's really realizing that every single moment we create something. And whatever we create is a conscious creation. Most people end up being unconscious. They're asleep. They're like, oh, I don't know. It just happened to me. Like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. Well, guess what? Nah, we create our destiny. We create the reality that we live in. And that means total 100% responsibility for everything. So when we talk about manifestation, it's really realizing that as we clear ourselves, our emotions, our desires, whatever we want, then we can recreate our lives. And when we go into the time capsule, I'll tell you how it started, but we'll go from there.
That's perfect. Okay, couple questions. Well, at least one question here, and I have to age you a little bit. So, where did you grow up? Like your teenage years, where were you living in your teenage years?
Yes, absolutely. So I was born in Greece, and I stayed in Greece until I was 12, going on 13. Then I went to France. So I did my high school in South France, Aix-en-Provence, very beautiful city. I grew up amongst the lavender fields and the sunflower fields and the cow fields. It was beautiful. And and then for 1 year, I went to New York.
All right, stop there. I want to stop in France for a second. I want to stop in France because that's where you finished your grade school in. That's when you were like 17, 18. So, what year was it when you finished that grade school? Like your 11th or 12th grade or whatever that is?
I think I was 18. I am just thinking, yes, definitely 18.
18. And what year was that?
1994.
94. Okay, I like that marker, kind of like that time when you have to make a bigger decision in your life. So, but talk to me about the high school. Talk to me about high school for a second, because those 4 years are really formative.
I actually, in France, is a little bit different. It's not the system in Greece is 6 years of elementary school and 6 years of high school, and the system in France is actually 6 years of elementary and then 7 years in high school. So like, and that's when you get at the end you get something called the baccalaureate. So like the baccalaureate degree. So I went all the way to get the baccalaureate Series C. At the time, it was like Series C, so that's math and science. And anybody in France who's really good at math and science is encouraged to be an engineer because they tend to be more soft skilled people in France, and so they tend to really value people who are good in math and science. So I was going that direction, and then I decided to go to school in the United States, and because when we were little, my dad was obsessed with MIT. Right. I remember him. Now we talk about artificial intelligence, but back then it was in the 80s. The scientists had created something where you will ask the machine, quote unquote, a question. That was the beginning of AI. And it will tell you a good idea or that you're stupid or whatever. And he was reading that article to us. And I remember back then he was like, won't be great if you go to MIT. So that means that when I applied for colleges, I did apply to MIT, and I was very, very lucky to get in. And it was kind of funny because nobody from my school had ever gone in. And so the next year, my brother, so I have two brothers, both of them went to MIT as well with me. So after I got in, my older brother transferred. My younger brother got in as an early decision. So we got into the Guinness Book of Records as the, three kids who got the fastest into MIT. And our record was broken maybe, I'm going to say 5-10 years ago. There was a set of triplets that arrived. So they definitely broke our record. And my younger brother now is still a professor at MIT. So we are definitely an MIT family.
What did your dad do for work that he was so interested in that tech?
My dad himself was a civil engineer. My mother was an architect. So both of them studied in the National Technical University of Athens. So when they studied there, it was harder to get in than it was to get into MIT. My dad came from a little village in an island called Lesbos, which, by the way, I always joke my dad is a lesbian because he is.
From Lesbos.
Yeah, it's a population like less than 100,000, right? So it's like it's kind of rare, but he is, and he was.
I had a I had a I had a friend who was a Franciscan brother, and he got a spiritual theological degree, and he would tell everybody that he has an STD. That was his favorite joke. Franciscan brother walking around, and somebody would ask him about his education. He, oh no no no, I have an STD. So it's kind of like the same joke. It's just funny.
And so my dad had this desire to do great things. Like he grew up during the Second World War. Like his father passed on, and so I mean, as you can imagine, he grew up very, very poor in misery. His mother decided to keep all the kids, which I don't know. In some ways, maybe it was a good idea. In some ways, maybe not, because relatives were willing to. There were 5 children, and so when my dad was 5 years old, they kind of christened him the father of the family, right? So from that point on, he was the breadwinner of the family. Brilliant man, but very, very difficult upbringing. And the when he went to Athens now from his little village in Lesbos, he went to Athens, and then he wanted to go to school. He didn't have money. He had to make money in order to survive, right? So he was always working, always trying to make money, and so he never got to study very much. But I mean, he did study, but he didn't have the specialized studying that it will allow him to get into the next National Technical University of Athens, and so that year, so he got in with a second try. So the first year he applied both to the universities of Athens, like all of the universities in Athens, and to this National Technical Institute, and he got first in the country in all the universities, but he did not get into the NTUA. And
That's wild. That university is so tough.
oh, it was tough because it was 40 people, 40 per year. But he had seen, so my dad, when he was very little, there was no cars, right? Because you can imagine my dad was born in 31. And he had seen one car in the whole island of Lesbos. And it was he said, who has this car? And it was an engineer. So he said, I'm going to be an engineer. That's how he decided to be an engineer. And so he was committed.
And then all his kids became engineers. Wow. And MIT on top of that. Was there pressure? Was there pressure to be an engineer? Was there pressure to be good in math and science?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. My dad was an extraordinary man, an incredibly damaged man, as you can imagine. So I think all of us have a little bit of that. And in a sense, this is what created the quote unquote difficulties in my life growing up, because I kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing to the point where it kind of broke me. It broke my health, and I ended up being in a wheelchair. I mean, this was the formative, and I know we'll talk about this in a minute, but this is because I really did not want to be an engineer. I've always cared about business, but both from France, so anybody who was good in math and science was an engineer, and from my family, I was an engineer. I wanted to study business and economics, and my dad said, that's not real degrees. You have to study engineering. So I literally started by triple majoring economics, business, and mechanical engineering, because I said, okay, fine, I'll do what I have to do to graduate, but then I will also do what I want. And at the end, I ended up doing like a minor in management and mechanical engineering, and a minor in economics, and like the double major in Mechie and Sloan. And then for my graduate degree, I did, again, I was very, very controlled, very directed. I had a scholarship to go to Stanford. My biggest regret in life, one of my biggest regrets, because I really wanted to go to Stanford. But my dad had never heard of Stanford, so I was not allowed. And so I stayed at MIT. So I got into a joint program called CIPD, the Center for Innovation and Product Development, which was between the engineering school and the Sloan School of Management. And I studied pretty much product development and innovation and did startup. So I'm not saying I went to a bad school. I'm just saying my dream was to go to Stanford.
I feel like you did a tremendous amount of studying while you were over there at MIT, and it feels super intense for the amount of classes and work you did. But did you? For me, I guess in my brain, college is supposed to be like 50-50. Like you're supposed to work hard and get your degree, but it's also a time in your life where you're finally out of the house and you kind of get to find yourself as a person too. So did you have any of that?
No, that only happened after I left MIT. So because remember so when I got in, I pretty much called my brother, who was at the time in TUS, and I said, hey, you're smarter than me, get in. And so he applied as a transfer student, and my younger brother got in. So when both my brothers got into MIT, unfortunately, that meant that my quote unquote family was with me. And my parents bought a house in Boston and moved there as well. So we kind of continued the same, lifestyle.
You lived at home all those years, essentially.
No, I didn't live at home. I lived in the dorms, but next to my brothers, because this is, and again, I come from a very patriarchal society. I was raised in a very traditional home. And so my role as a woman was to take care of my brothers. And so my dad, I was like triple majoring. He will call me and say, how are you doing? He will not ask, how are you doing? He will say, are you washing the dishes? Are you cooking for your brothers? Are you doing their laundry? That was my job, right?
And your brothers didn't just take responsibility for their laundry, they expected you to be doing their laundry.
That's our culture, right? And it took me, it almost, as I said, if I look back into my life, I feel that I was lucky compared to many, many women in the world, but I was pretty much raised and followed a traditional model. I believe that, and we'll talk about this in a minute, but I believe that me getting sick was my body saying, we are done with this old model. Like, we have to embrace the new model. And it was very, very difficult for me to switch from things happen to me, so being a victim, to being who I am today, where I create my life and destiny. Because, all right, so if everything, right, it sounds really impressive, but there's always the light and the dark. So the light side is like I look extraordinary on the outside. The inside was I was very, very abused. So growing up, I was abused verbally, physically, emotionally, sexually, and I that continued into my adult life. And I truly was raised to be a victim. I was raised to be told what to do. I was raised to be, even though I am a strong person, right? I was just like absolutely an obeying person. And I also will apologize for everything. I was too nice. And I am very kind. I still am extremely kind, but I am not nice. But because being nice means that you do things in order to be approved. And I don't do that anymore. But I definitely can tell you that when we are stuck in that place, it's really, really difficult to get out.
You don't even know you're in that place at that
Yeah.
age,
How
really.
could you?
It's
How
not
could you?
fair. You don't know. That's your life. You're inside the box. You can't see outside of it.
Right. What is it? You can't read the label when you're inside the jar, right? And I didn't know. Like, as I said, one of my biggest regrets was not going to Stanford, not being allowed to go to Stanford because my dad did not know what Stanford was. And he said, MIT is the best, you stay there, period. Is one of the most difficult experiences I had to realize. And for the first time in my life, I was like, why did I not go? Like the dean of Stanford, the dean, he called me and he said, Maria, I'd like to ask you a question. We only give 7 scholarships because they gave me a full scholarship. We said we give 7 of them per year. Why are you not accepting it? And I didn't know what to say. I said personal reasons, but after that I cried. And for the first time, I realized there must be something wrong with me. I didn't know. I just simply didn't know.
I was wondering if your father was paying for school, so you were kind of forced, but you had the scholarship there. So, and that was for graduate school, or that would have been instead of MIT for undergrad.
So my dad made a lot of money in his life, so he did pay for a lot of our schooling because there's not that many grants available for undergraduate, and there's 3 of us. But I did have a lot of grants. One thing that MIT says, if you're smart enough to be here, we'll finance you. And so in a sense, like we got as many, like they kind of work their butts off to get us as many scholarships as possible. I have so many scholarships. I have I don't even know. I have a list.
You finished your MIT undergraduate degree in 4 years. You did your 4 years there, but you really got several degrees during that time.
Yeah. I actually did 4 years mechanical engineering. Then I did an additional year at the Sloan. And then I did 2 more years for the graduate.
What was the graduate work in?
So it was called CAPD, the Center for Innovation and Product Development. So it was a joint effort between the mechanical engineering department, so the product development lab, and the Sloan School of Management and Innovation.
I was wondering how you pulled that off because you're now starting to move away from the engineering. And I just imagine your dad screaming at you and trying to pull you back.
I, as I said, life kind of took care of this. I ended up in a wheelchair. So in 2004, I was diagnosed with a very severe form of multiple sclerosis, which left me in a wheelchair, debilitated. Like it was like game over for me. And I had to rebuild everything from scratch. And I read a book at the time. We were talking about manifestation. This was At the time, I didn't know anything about that. I knew, like, you set a goal, you achieve the goal, period, right? No questions asked. And that means that pulling all-nighters was part of my lifestyle. Um, it was a badge of honor. How many all-nighters did you pull that week, right? And and then not taking care of myself was a badge of honor as well. So 2001, I got into Media Lab, so I was working there. So it was the dot-com boost. Like, I can finance a company I had. So a professor at the Media Lab kind of sponsored me to stay. And then I met this man that I got engaged to, and he was starting a PhD in Berkeley. And I think part of me got engaged with him because he was going to California, and then I could leave, and I would be allowed to leave. And so we got engaged, and we left. And when we arrived in Berkeley, that's pretty much when I got sick a few months later. So it was brutal.
But at this point, you're done with the schooling. You're now looking to work full time at this point.
Yeah. At this point, I was still doing startups. I was in startups, like it was the .com. I was doing startups. I've been in startups since '95, and you thought my degrees were a lot. Well, I had a full social life. I was president for I don't know how many. I at the maximum at the zenith, I was president for 5 student organizations. I was the liaison between the various schools in so the deans in MIT and the various student groups. I was the president of the International Student Association. I had created something called the International Fair, which existed before with like 5 groups, and then I arrived and became 40 groups. All the groups, like, it became the big event, the yearly big event at MIT. And then I was like, I'm an overachiever amongst overachievers.
I'm curious. I just got to throw this. I almost feel like at this point in your life, you have a hard time saying no.
Oh, absolutely,
Like
100%.
things are coming at you, and your answer is yes, yes. Like that's something I had to learn doing community work. At some point, you got to learn how to say no, because if not, you go underwater.
Yeah, pretty much. That's what happened to me. That's why I burned out. I think that me getting sick was burning out, like, because I was doing so much, right? And on top of that, remember, there's no reward system for me. Everything is like, Maria, who cares? Like, are you doing the dishes and are you washing the clothes, right? I mean, and it's not necessarily it's easy to judge from the outside, but this is where I grew up from. This became the normal part. I don't think my brothers or parents knew, like, this was not okay. Like, I had to discover that. And I'm very grateful that I studied in the United States, because then I could discover that.
Talk to me. I'm actually kind of curious about the very first startup that you did.
So my brother, so remember, my brothers are also pretty brilliant. And my older brother was the president of the Tau Beta Pi, which is like the honor society. And he said, there's nothing that creates resumes. So we created a little company called Resumes Online. That was, first company. We didn't get any funding. It ended up being just for a Tau Beta Pi, and I don't remember what it ended up being. But
That's a hard thing to do in '95. The internet is
oh my God,
brand
yes.
new. HTML is brand new. I don't even think you had enough tech to pull that off in '95.
No, probably not. I mean, it didn't go very far, and part of it was my first learning experience, but I got hooked from that on. There's something about creation. For me, startups, like, it's taking something from zero to something. It's so much harder than if you take something from 10 to 100 or 100 to 1,000, you're multiplying. If you take something from 0 to 10, you're creating. It's incredibly difficult and really fun.
I just a side note here. Does that still get you excited? Because I've been in the industry I started in '91 professionally, right? I'm tired. Like I don't know if I want to create something from scratch anymore. I'm just at that point.
So here's the thing. I get excited about people, and I get excited about creating, but I don't get excited about the new shiny object. I find that with wisdom and what growing up, the wisdom I gained is the ability to discern what is important and what is not. Kind of what you were saying, not knowing my priorities. So now I know my priorities. I know what matters to me. And every so often I do a clearing session where I clear things that I don't need. And I'm like, well, is that needed? And I also delegate. I am very good at delegating. I hire people for whatever I don't want to do.
You finish your degrees, you're in Boston at that point, you're doing these startups, and then you meet someone, you get engaged, you move to California. You're finally in California. That's where you want to be. What year is it? What year is it when you moved again?
No, that was 2000, 2003 we arrived, September.
But between that time, you're working different startups in between that time, between
Yeah. So some of them successful, some of them not. It's a very long story and subject, so I don't want to go too much in the details. But I learned from the startup work, from the tech startup world, I learned a lot about the dynamics, the mechanics, the understanding. It was kind of a really fast time until it wasn't, but it was really fast. Everything was moving. I call this the yin and yang, like the flow versus like this pushing. I was like 100% young at the time. I was 100% discipline, achievement, overachieving, and at that speed, at that in that paradigm, if you want to call it, of the world, speed is everything. So the faster you go, the better it is, right? So it was just riding waves. It was just like, whoa, let's go for that. And as I said, my brother is a professor at MIT, and I still see him at that speed. And sometimes I feel sad for him because I'm like, wow, don't you ever stop? Don't you breathe? But he cannot.
the people around you in these startups must have been exhausted watching you. Like nobody could keep up with you. That's for sure.
My brother could. My brother could. We were like the only ones, like me and my younger brother in grad school. Amongst other things, we were partying, and so we had a rule, like we will, like every opportunity we had, we'll go out, and we were like the heart of the parties. Like I knew thousands of people, and like we will have parties, like huge parties. And I remember we will go out and go dance. Like, so we'll have the crazy life, right? Crazy work, and then go party hard at the end of the day and dance, dance.
Work hard, party hard.
Yeah, pretty much. Not recommended, but we definitely did that. And I remember there was one point we said we're going out too much, and I wasn't drinking, I wasn't doing anything, I was just like dancing. But I love dancing, and then one day we made a rule, like, oh, no more going out on Tuesdays, right? Because Mondays we had something that we had to go to, and then Wednesday, and then but Tuesday was not something regular, so then we didn't, and we broke that rule every week anyway.
Yeah, I just feel like if I was got hired to be in one of your startups and I'd be watching you, they'd either be I have to try to keep up to impress the boss, or I'm either gonna try or I'm just gonna like there's no in between.
So here's the thing. If you're around somebody like me back then, but even today, right? You get to ride the wave. You get to be in their little bubble, right? And it feels normal, quote unquote, and feels like this is the way life is. And to be someone once said to me, Maria, it feels like you're living 5 or 10 lives in parallel. I'm like, yeah, probably. And even today, I'm doing like, I have my company, I have like I'm writing books, I'm doing a PhD, I'm a speaker, I do retreats. Like even today, like I still do this like multiple lives in parallel kind of like paradigm. I do it in such a seamless and easy way that I think maybe I've mastered how to do this crazy lifestyle without stress.
It's funny because I'll sit on the couch there might be a Saturday where just don't want to do anything. I'm sitting on the couch, but then I start feeling guilty. And my wife has to look at me and she's like, it's okay to rest. Just sit there. Don't do anything. Because I start feeling guilty that I'm not being productive.
I don't ever feel guilty. I consider this a useless emotion that I got rid of a long time ago. So I don't do things out of guilt. I do things because I'm excited. Or I meditate. And I also meditate a lot. And I have to tell you a secret. When you meditate, it increases time exponentially. So it may feel like, it almost feels like everything slows down. So then you can do a lot more things in 5 minutes.
All right, so you're in California. Your body basically breaks down. You've been pushing way too hard. You get sick. You end up in a wheelchair. I still don't see that stopping you from doing anything that you're doing.
No, no, no. It was a full stop. I was in tremendous pain. So I had what they call neuropathic pain. So that means everything in my body was in pain. And then there was no drugs strong enough to take care of me. Um, the only thing I knew in the hospital, and I spent a lot of time in the hospital, was no morphine, because I had watched that movie Frida, and I knew that morphine was for terminal patients. So I was like, no morphine. But they gave me OxyContin, which eventually got me addicted to OxyContin, which another fun adventure where I had to get out of like being an addict, right? But it was bad. My fiance left me, so he kind of said, "Hey, Maria, I didn't sign up for this one. Uh, Even if we had children, I will leave you." And it broke my heart. Um, Everybody abandoned me. Everybody. I know it's hard to say. And in the old paradigm, in the patriarchal paradigm, I was told that I will take care of my brothers all my life, but if I ever needed them, they will take care of me. And that didn't happen. One of my brothers didn't even bother to come see me or say hello. The other brother was applying to be a professor at Berkeley and dropped by on his visit to the application, right? It was hard. There's very, very few people in that point that ever stayed with me. There's one of my friends from MIT actually that I consider my sister. She came to spend time with me. She spent maybe a month with me when I was in the hospital, and she brought her little daughter Zoe. Zoe was like less than 1 at the time, and she was learning how to walk. And it gave me the courage to start walking, because I will fall. Like I will try to walk and fall, but then I will start comparing I stopped comparing myself to the adults. I started comparing myself to Zoe. How many times did Zoe fall today? How many times did Maria fall today? And, it gave me a lot of hope. So I'm always, always grateful to my friend. Like her name's Sabrina. Like Sabrina is like my sister. I love her. And truly, in our lives, in our hardest trials, there's always these shining people that come and help us. And I believe there are angels. And so she's always been my angel and sister and friend.
But you're able to fight through that disease, right? You're back to.
So for the first time in my life, so there's two things that happen. I knew that we use, like that our body gets regenerated. So every 7 to 15 years, all our cells in our body will get regenerated. So I said, hey, I can recreate that. And I also knew that our brain, we only use a percentage of our brain. At least at the time, our understanding is like maybe we use less than 10% of our brain. Maybe we use more, but whatever. Like I'm like, hey, I have like lots of cells that were destroyed because it was really bad. I mean, I can see, I can swallow, I can move. I was in terrible pain. Like I had lost coordination. Everything was crooked. I mean, it was bad. And I said, you know what? I can rebuild. I can rebuild. The greatest book that I got at the time was called Love, Medicine, and Miracles. And it's actually my gastroenterologist who gave it to me. So I was, amongst other things, with all the drugs that I had been given, my stomach was completely destroyed. I couldn't eat anything without throwing up. It was kind of really bad. And so I had terrible inflammation in all my intestines. I mean, it was bad. And he said to me, "You're too young." At the time, I was 27, 28 years old. And he's like, "I want to give you hope." And he gave me this book, Love, Medicine, and Miracles. And I read this book, and it was about cancer patients. And it was an oncologist, Dr. Siegel, who studied how people survive cancer. Because he said, I am so tired of seeing people die. And there are extraordinary patients. And he said, it doesn't matter what you have, as long as you believe you're okay. Like that was the only correlation he found across the board. If people believe they're going to leave, they're going to leave. If they will believe they die, they will die. And I said, okay, I'm going to be okay. I'm getting out of the wheelchair. And it was a moment. The insurance had approved the motorized wheelchair, and they came in and demonstrated, and it was so painful. I don't know if you've ever visited Berkeley, and Berkeley is one of the friendliest cities for handicapped people, because they do have ramps. But even so, going through the sidewalk up and down the road, right? And then down to the, like, I went around one city block and I was like, it took me forever and it was so painful. I said, I don't want to be in a wheelchair for the rest of my life. And, uh, and so that's when I decided I had to do something else.
Yeah, so what is that something else? Because I mean, you're young, you're 28, yeah. I'm curious where your story goes from there. How long does it take for you to get out of this wheelchair and start your life again?
It took me 18 months. And I'm going to say that maybe at that point I had the awareness. So that it's almost a spiritual experience that I had in the hospital. Because for the first time in my life, I realized we're not our mind. Up to that point, I thought I was my mind. And my mind wasn't working. And somehow I still had the awareness of being me. I was not my body. My body was broken. And I was still me. I'm not my emotions. My emotion depended on the happy drugs they were giving me. And but I was still there. So I'm not my mind, I'm not my emotions, I'm not my thoughts, I'm not my memories. Who am I? I started asking the question, who am I? And the one thing that helped me more than anything is that I lost everything. All my money went to hospital bills, all the way to till I qualified, well, for definitely Social Security, but for food stamps. And it was like, oh my God, there was a part of me that was completely depressed, right? Because I was like, there's not no way out of this, right? And and so I credit my upbringing. I'm Christian, and in Christianity, suicide is a bad idea. So I credit that for not ever considering suicide. As bad as it got, I was like, it's okay. I believe, right? And somehow I had this crazy awareness that I will, if I had to check out, I will come back to the same trouble. Like it's almost I had to go through it. And I'm just going to move a little bit forward. So 2012. So I had between 2008 and 2012, I had a series of accidents and diseases. And 2012 was the last serious accident. And this time I fell in a construction shaft and I quote unquote died. So I had what we call a near death experience. And I experienced what they call here in the East the Bodhisattva experience because I went back hundreds of lives, thousands of years back, and I lived through them. And time moves very differently on the other side. And I had the awareness of living through these lives, being me, and seeing karma kind of unfolding between lives. And it didn't make sense to me at all. But suddenly I was like, oh, oh, that's how it works. And more than that, I found love, like everything that you can imagine, the most loving, kind, oh my God, light, just pure light is on the other side. So I was like, ooh, everything I'm looking for is there. I just have to be dead. So I'm definitely not suicidal, but I'm definitely looking forward to die. During that time, I kind of realized that this this is all a joke. It doesn't exist, right? And that's when I've been having lots and lots of spiritual experiences and out of body experiences for years, right? At that point, so I kind of came back knowing that there was something else that I needed to discover. That because you can imagine somebody like me with all this upbringing, with all this education, like it was really hard for me to let go and say, hey, I'm going somewhere else. I'm letting go of all this because I had a vested interest. Like my life was defined by my achievements.
But I find it interesting that you had a half a decade of just accidents and calamity, and you didn't give up, and you got through to the other side, even as scary as at your worst with the near death experience.
I, I'm, I'm gonna say must mean that I'm super, super strong and super courageous. At the time, it didn't feel like that, but there is a side of me that's extremely resilient, and it's almost because I truly believed inside me. I truly believed that it can be better. That I never lost that hope. I mean, okay, I did lose it. Let me rephrase that. I did lose it, but I will always pray until I gained it back. Because it's very, very easy with the mind to forget that, to say there's no hope, there's no way out, right? That's the mind, what it says. But yeah, there is.
The biggest trauma I've been through is I've been through a divorce, which was horrific, horrific. Nothing with what
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
going
but I'm
through would
sure
help.
it's
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
And I remember it took 5 years, and life is so much better now, right? But when you're in the middle of that, you just don't see that if you keep fighting through it, your life will get better. It's always a pure trauma for 5 years. And everybody tells you at the beginning, just fight through it. We promise, we promise. But you don't believe that when you're in the middle of it.
It's hard. And somebody asked me, so I thought I had trauma from my childhood. Like, so I've worked for years through my trauma and all the horrible things that happened to me throughout my life and my adult life, right? And and I kind of had forgotten the trauma of all the accidents, the diseases, the hospital. Like I had to blocked it out, which is what our mind is really good at doing, right? And one thing that I can tell you from my perspective now is that there's no punishment. It's not like we're being punished. What is happening is that our quote unquote soul or higher being or whatever, higher self, whatever you want to call it, is kind of reaching through and helping us guide to something that we don't even know is possible. The I was talking to my friend Sabrina, I was mentioning, right? So the other day, and I was like, sometimes I think about it. And I'm like, why did I have such a hard life? And she's like, Maria, you're you're one of a kind. Like, I don't think you will be you if you hadn't gone through all this.
Is it that idea of things happen for a reason? Because that's what gets me through a lot of stuff sometimes. I'm just like, this is happening for a reason. See it through, fight it through, and you'll know.
And remember, like in the progression, things happen to me, things happen for me, things happen through me. So when you're in the things happen to me, oh my God, why did that happen to me? Why am I in the wheelchair? Why am I being sick? Why me? Why me? That's definitely victim. When you start thinking things happen for a reason, then you're already you feel luckier. You still think that it happens independent of you, but it stops being this torture that you're being punished. And I always say, if you're in the fair stage where you feel like a victim, all you have to do is start thinking things happen for a reason. Find the reason. Your mind is good at finding reasons. All you have to do is ask. And as long as you find a reason, you can go to the next step. And it takes an awareness to go to this. With my clients, sometimes I will get them through those 4 stages, right? That's part of what I do. And there's a tremendous resistance. When we go from stage 2 to stage 3, something truly shifts, right? And it's almost like an ego death. So people like, I always tell people, and they never believe me, but they always go through that. There will be a time when you will hate me. Remember, it's not me. And they always go and they're like, I used to like you. What happened? I'm like, oh, congratulations, you're moving up.
Now, I'm definitely in the. I've learned the idea that my ex did whatever she did it for me at this point, because my life is so much better now, and that allows my brain to not be mad at her anymore either. It's amazing. And if it's a game I'm playing in my head, I don't care, because I'd rather feel like this than feel the other way.
100%. There is a great body of work. It's called Radical Forgiveness by Colin Tipping. So I highly recommend it very often to my clients as well. So radical forgiveness will get you through those first 3 stages. So from the victim to the things happen for me, all the way to the third stage where you just observe without judgment. And I always say, if you have a big trauma, work through the first 3 steps, because the last step is a really it takes a little bit of I still haven't figured out how to help people do it like in a second. It takes a moment.
Time heals things too. You need time. I don't know. I feel like some.
It's almost time gives perspective. The perspective allows us to think, in the moment, it feels like the horrible thing. The sky fell in my head. But with perspective, it feels like, oh, it wasn't so bad after all. Right. But we still have to keep going through things. Like, I, as I'm getting more popular, I during COVID, I became quote unquote a little bit popular in China, and then I got some haters in China, right? And when I still have them, right? I mean, they 2, 3 years later, they still remember me and actively work against me. But I'm like, okay, whatever, if that's what you need to do, right? But in the beginning, in the moment, it felt like I was being attacked. I was like, my values, like blah blah blah. Why are you doing this to me, right? And then because I know the game, I was like, okay, immediately, why is this a gift? How can I find gratitude, right? So shift from 1 to 2, and then I observed and I said, well, how did this happen in my life before? When have I seen this again and again and again? And when I got, it's almost like, and I know the questions, right? I know the steps. So I said, okay, well, the next step is like, why did I create this? How is this serving me? Why did I create this? And those questions through the mind, like I always say, we can use the mind to go beyond the mind. So, but it's a good question. Why would I create this? Right. And in a sense, it's like, hey, if I am to be in the public, like if I am to be a speaker, then I need to know that people will hate me, and that's okay. I cannot please everyone. And it's okay to be ignored, but it's really difficult. Like, but it's difficult to have people attack you for no reason, right? But suddenly I was like, oh, okay, now I understand. It's okay. It has nothing to do with me, right? But in theory, really easy to say, right? In practice, when you're being actively attacked and called like the worst thing in the world, and like it's almost like you question. I question myself for sure, for sure. I was like, what did I do wrong? How could this be? Like how? But if I think about it now, why did I create this? Because of my childhood, people criticizing me and me having to justify things. I had to create it to realize that um, I don't need to justify everything I do. It's almost like I get to the point where I'm like, okay, you like me or not, that's your business, not mine.
It is super tough. When I started this business I'm in now, social media is a big part of connecting with people. And absolutely, I was connecting with people who didn't like me, for sure. We're not afraid to vocalize it. And when you first start getting those sorts of attacks, it's scary, especially if your livelihood is somewhat dependent on it. It's easy to just say, I give up, I'm getting out of here. But I think my kids and having to provide for them
Kind of helped you.
got me through the early stages of that because I'm like, whatever, I can't quit. My kids, I think, have always stopped me from quitting everything because if I walk away, then who's going to take care of them? Like
Exactly. Yeah.
nobody else, right? Like they've been that grounding for me to keep going. But even after 10 years and feeling like all this experience, somebody could say something that always hurts. I mean, you're a human being. If it didn't hurt, you can't be that indifferent. I mean, you shouldn't let it bother you more than 30 seconds.
Yeah. It's always when I hear something, I ask myself now, what is the truth? What are they really trying to say? Like there was this guy like a couple months ago, super mad at me. Oh, you make it sound like you're special because of all the horrible things that happened to you, and you're so selfish and so self-centered. And I thought about it for a moment, and I said, yeah, you're right. Thank you. And then I realized, I'm like, yeah. And that's when I start. Remember, I told you I had forgotten the trauma. I think in my mind, I had barricaded myself behind the idea, oh, wow, that was such a gift. I'm so special, that I had forgotten that this was a horrible thing with a lot of trauma that I need to work through. And I had not worked through that trauma, which I'm actively doing now. So in a sense, he did give me something, not in the way I wish he had told me, but he did give me something valuable. It's just like in the moment, I could just go defensive and go, oh my God, he's so wrong. Like, of course, these things I didn't ask for any of it to happen. Like, of course, blah, blah, blah. But instead I said, okay, stop here, Maria, let your ego go down, and then ask, what is he really saying? And I said, why is he right? And I said, yeah, in some ways I do feel like it's a gift, which is how I got through it, right? So I definitely became grateful. And at the same time, by being grateful, I had made it idolize it and did not see the duality of it. Of course, it was horrible too. Like there was one point I remember in the hospital, I was so desensitized to my body. Like the medicine, the intravenous medicine at the time, they had to do a PICC line, which goes through here directly to the heart, right? But until that point, they were giving me medicine through my hands and feet, right? And all the veins had burned. And so, like, literally, you could see this web of veins in my hands. And, I was watching this, right, in my hands and feet. And I was like, literally, I was fascinated. It was like such a disassociation from my body that I was not looking at it like, oh, it's my body. I was looking at it, wow, this is like a work of art. Like, how interesting, how weird.
So let's get back to that last accident you have, and what happens after that? Like, what changes after that to be kind of where you are? Because that was 2012, you said, right? I mean, we're still kind of 10 years out from today.
So in that moment, there is something that happened. I could not go back. I could not go back. I could not go back to trying to do success, to try to achieve, to like it literally, I saw that from the perspective of the soul, if you want to call it that, from the perspective on the other side, that the quote unquote soul overhead, whatever is traveling through, is does not remember anything except love. So the duality I understood was love or not love. And suddenly I felt that, am I giving love? Am I giving love to the world? Yes, and to myself too. And how do I do that? And that was the new journey that I went into. How do I bring more love into the world, to myself, to everyone I come into contact with? Literally every person I meet now, for anything, my goal is to give them a little bit of love in any way, shape, or form it takes, right? I'm in Thailand, so it's very, I literally walk around it because they're a Buddhist country. They give alms to the monks, so the monks have nothing. But it's almost okay to go around and give like little packages of food to people. So I literally do that almost daily. I Why? Because no reason. If you're in front of me, I'll just give you something. Why not? Right? And it allows me to be in this space of feeling so grateful and abundant.
But at some point now, 2012, 2013, you still have to make an income. You got to support yourself, right? You have to. So what's in your head in terms of you can walk now, right? Your body is.
Yeah. So there's time in between 2004 and 2012 where I went back to working. I had some money, so I started traveling. So after I got out of the hospital, because remember now I broke my back again, and my hand and my jaw, like all the teeth in the back of my mouth are fake, and it took a while to recover from all that. Like I get out of the hospital, like spend months in bed again, terrible pain. But at that point, it's a very different experience because of all that. Like at that point, I'm playing with lucid dreaming, and but anyway, so I went to Bali for 2 weeks and then living there for a year and a half in Bali, Indonesia. And in Bali is a very, especially Ubud in Bali is a very, like it's almost like a spiritual mecca. Like people from around the world will go and for fun. I arrived there as I have no idea, I'm just visiting, and in a party, like one of my first weeks there, I met this guy and I read his hands, and he was like, "Oh my God, you're one of the best readers I've ever met. How do you see those things?" I'm like, it's obvious, right? And then so he literally started sending clients to me. So people will call me and they want to have a session with me, and I was like, huh? I'm sorry, what are you talking about? I'm an engineer. But I started eventually, I figured out what happened. I talked to him, he's like, Maria, you're one of the best in the world. Like, do this. So I was like, okay, here I am, Maria.
But how did you learn how to do that, or it was just instinctive at that point? Because I don't hear in your story your ability to do this just yet, and now suddenly you're doing this.
Ah, 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 ah. Okay. So in 2004, remember I'm in a wheelchair in terrible pain. So medicine was not working. And then after a few months, I got out of the hospital and I talked to the doctors, and they never told me that OxyContin is opiate, right? And I said, if I have one medicine I need to get rid of, which one should it be? I want to start getting rid of my medicine. They said, that one. And so, being me, I said, okay, we're quit, right? And I remember I woke up in the middle of the night in sweats, crying in terrible pain until I got the drug, right? And I got my fix. And that's when I realized I was a drug addict. And and so now I have to somehow control pain without medicine, right? Because let me tell you, happy drugs are happy drugs. Nothing compares. And so at the hospital, they gave me a tape, a cassette tape from John Kabat-Zinn. So it was a meditation where you will imagine pain as fire and imagine water coming in. So I started doing this quote unquote meditation. I had no idea what meditation is, but somehow it controlled my pain. So I was like, sign me up. So I started taking meditation classes. I'm like, okay, I'm meditation all the way now. And very, very, very fast. And remember, I have gone through months and months in the hospital with this who am I question, very, very present. So it's almost like a spiritual journey, if you want to call it that. And so very, very fast, when I took a class online, quote unquote, and remember at the time there's no classes online, right? But I can go anywhere. So, and the it was about meditation. I remember listening to the class and I'm like, yay. And I paid 1,500 that I didn't have at the time just to be in that class. And the guy's like, okay, just close your eyes and look into your third eye and then breathe. And I was like, what the, what just happened? I'm like, I want my money back.
Yeah. No.
I was like, dude, do you realize how hard it is for me to have this kind of money? And it's like, I called the professor and I said, I'm sorry, I don't think this is for me. He said, look, Maria, how about we make a deal? I see your soul. I see who you are. And how about you give it a week? You actually do it for 1 week. And if nothing happens, then I'll give you a refund. I said, sure, fair enough. And I could have lied, but I'm a good soldier. So I was like, yeah, let's do it. So every day I will wake up, meditate. Every night I will meditate. And it was day 3 or 4. I woke up and it was like I was super sleepy and groggy, and I started meditating, and I went through what we call a wormhole. So suddenly, I don't know if have you ever seen the movie Contact with Jodie Foster?
Yeah.
Yeah, remember that scene where she goes through the wormhole? That's kind of how it looked for me. It's after a while I saw that movie and I was like, oh, that one. So I went through this really. It was a tunnel of light. It was going really, really, really fast. It was moving and moving and moving. And at the end, I arrived and I was floating. And I felt I could walk, and I'm still in a wheelchair, right? So I'm like, what happened? What is that? and and that single experience is what allowed me to keep the motivation to I never had it again, but well, much later I had a very different experience, but chasing that experience, I mean, it was the best experience of my life, hands down, until that point. And so chasing that experience is what got me to have a real spiritual practice. And I went all the way to 12 hours a day kind of meditation, because I'm an overachiever, right? So I'm like 2 hours and then 4 hours and then 6 hours and then let's do like a real sadhana practice, right? But during all this time, I'm developing this sixth sense, these abilities, this I mean, you cannot help it. It happens. Like if you actually do this kind of practice, you will develop those abilities. And so in remember, I'm going through accident after accident, disease after disease, and I have to quote unquote heal myself every time through a miracle. So I'm like, yeah, I'm an MIT person. I don't believe in miracles. So what's the science behind it? I created this idea. Like I had a blog, The Science of the Miraculous, right? Because I'm like, let's talk about how things happen, right? Which eventually became what I call now the Empower Method, which was, it's a method in literally how to generate miracles. Because I'm like, hey, if you want to have a miracle, how will you do it? Because, I'm like, I can tell you, I'm no saint, right? But I kept having miracles. And more than that, in 2008, for the first time, I remember I went back to Greece and I saw my cousin and I hugged her and she started crying. And then she had been trying to get pregnant for 17 years. And then next month she was pregnant. She's like, Maria, what did you do? I'm like, I didn't do anything. But then as people started coming and getting quote unquote miracles around me, which I thought I was generating at the time, I thought I was enlightened. Ooh, go guru. But anyway, but the point is, like, eventually my ego went down. I'm like, okay, I'm no saint. What's the method? right? And that's when I kind of really started seriously looking at the aspects of it, the steps of it.
But you're reading this person's hand, so
So to me,
so that's part of that was just part of what you developed.
no, I just used his hands because it was a lot more convenient than telling him I read your energy. Right at the time, I wasn't being that obvious.
That's
I'm
but
like,
now you start a business.
oh, well, because people started coming to me for sessions in Bali. So I literally started having sessions in Bali. Like I started making a living doing sessions as a reader. I was reading people's future. It's almost like I could see the veil, like the veil is like the veil of time and space, and it kind of moves. And I could, at first, I started picking through it, and then I started going through, and then whoop, all the way out. And then it was an actual real good experience for me because the more people I was reading, the more I was going through the veil, right? And the more you have it open, the more you see. And then as I was going through, I realized we do not have one destiny. In the beginning, I could only see a little bit, right? But then I was going through and I was like, whoa, look at all these paths. And so I realized it's pointless to tell people their future because it's they create it. That's when I realized we create our future. So in a sense, it was a very good learning experience for me. But it could only have happened if I kept reading people's fates, right? Because it's easy to tell for myself, right? But how about others? And I did spend some time looking in the future exclusively until I realized our power is in the now. And if I'm in the future trying to control the future, I'm like losing. I'm not in my power. So stay here. Don't try to control anything. Just live the moment. But it took me an awareness to get there.
How long did you do that for? Was that like a year of
Year and a half. Yeah. That was the Bali time. Yeah. And then I started. So I had a mentor. I had a mentor who was a reader, and then at the time I had some savings, and she, I don't know. I mean, I really trusted her, and I gave her a quote unquote loan for $20,000 that then she took and started telling the world that I'm a horrible person, so she won't have to return it. And it broke my heart, but also taught me that I cannot take this kind of abuse. Like if you can read people and you take advantage of them, like she could read that I had some savings. So then she asked for it and I gave it because at the time I considered her my mentor and I consider her this incredible person. I think it was the time when I was like, whoa, this is all BS. Like I am not a reader. I don't believe in reading the future. I don't believe I got angry and, yeah, sometimes we have to, it was kind of like the slap in the face to change direction, right? And that's when I came to Thailand to start my PhD. So that's 2014 at the time.
what was the goal of getting the PhD? Is there a goal behind getting this PhD? Like, why that choice? You could have done anything. You could have done a million things at that point.
I wanted to explain things in a way that made sense. And I come from an academic background. So I said, I want to explain mysticism and spiritual healing from an academic background. By the way, I found out over the years that they don't do that in my field. They only try to be the observer, quote unquote, and judge and like not necessarily understand. So, but I still completed it because I complete things, right? But it it kind of like gave me. I was looking, and I was trying to understand because remember all those things make no sense to my mind, right? And I was trying to find the theory, and one thing that I found is I literally studied multiple religions around the world. I did a PhD in comparative, like comparing different religions. Eventually, my field work ended up being Bali, but where they study, well, they have Buddhism, Hinduism, and some Tantra, and of course Islam. So I kind of studied all that. But really, my goal was to understand what do people say. Like I am not the first person to go through this. I cannot be the only one, right? So what do people say? What is the wisdom? And one thing I have found is that in the mystical, esoteric teachings of every single religion around the world, it's the same exact thing. It doesn't matter what religion, because that's the truth. Everything else is blah, blah. But if you take away the blah, blah, behind is truth and love.
I find it interesting. Do you feel like you've been able to, or just it's not there, the science behind all this? You've not really been able to make that connection, or you've been able to write, oh, you have been, okay.
Yeah. And I'm actually in the process of probably writing a book now, finally. But I don't know if you remember the hero's journey. So my hero's journey was math, science, engineering, business to elixir, like find the energy work. And then now I'm really coming back to my beginnings, because I realized that what I really care about is what I cared about day one. It's not like now, like I've always cared about business. So I'm going back to the business world. And it's almost like now, I am considering, I haven't started yet, but I'm considering doing a second PhD for fun on the effects of Tao Te Ching and Yin Yang in the business world. So that combining this wisdom into business practices. So that's where I'm at, but I haven't really taken any active steps yet. Like I am, my first step is actually I'm going to Malaysia next week, to visit a university there to see if maybe that's a place I could park for a while, and while I do other things. But we'll see.
I wonder if there's a part of your engineering brain. I think that I could tell you for me, have you ever heard of the radio show called Coast to Coast?
No, no.
They have a lot of interesting guests that talk about mystical stuff and everything other than engineering. So, and I love talk radio. So if I do long drives, I put Coast to Coast AM on, and they have it on. It's interesting. You might actually enjoy, and they have the shows. You can download their app and get to their shows. Super interesting stuff. Um, but there's always that part of my engineering brain that feels like it's not real unless I can tie something science to it, and it sucks, honestly. I feel like I shouldn't have a requirement like that, right? I don't want that requirement.
I have the same requirement. I literally worked in quote unquote miracles. Like I specialize in creating miracles for people. Like my beginning, the sessions I was doing was like literally miracle sessions, because I had to do over and over and over and over again to see that it works. So I definitely work like that. I don't have, I mean, I admire people of faith, but I don't. I definitely did not start as a faith person. So I was like, yep, let me get the proof behind this. Let me find a repeatable, reliable way to do it, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. Like otherwise it's BS. And no offense, right? And I find that it took me years and years and years of repeating the same steps and getting the same results to realize, oh, well, that's how it works, right? So then I developed a method that I call now the Empower Method, right? But all of that is like based on this idea that everything that we do has to, like start A all the way to, if you want to go there, how do you get there, right? And there's some things you cannot control, but you definitely can control the intention.
I love you have the engineering background on this, because I, I don't get to meet a lot of people with this kind of story. I mean, I hear it on the Coast to Coast all the time, but there's always half of my brain going, uh, I don't know if I believe this person. I don't know if I believe half of it, but the idea that you have this engineering background and you're doing PhDs and you're trying to study this from a scientific method makes me feel more comfortable. Like, okay, maybe like you believe as much as maybe I do that there's got to be some science behind it. So let's find it, sort of thing.
So let me, from my perspective now, what our mind requires is almost a pacifier, right? Because there's like lots and lots and lots of spiritual people who do this all the time, right? When I was in Bali, I was so different than everyone else, right? Because the other people would go and dance naked in the moonlight. And I was like, yeah, I don't do that.
Yeah.
And I remember joking one day that, I can't believe like these people just go dancing naked in the moonlight. And somebody on Facebook like sent me a video of them going to dance naked in the Uluwatu, like down in the beach in the moonlight, right? And I was like, yep, that's the people, right? And I was like, how do I fit in, right? I felt like I didn't fit in. But the point is, they also understood what I was talking about, except they never bothered to explain it. They're just like, whoa, just go with the flow. And I'm like, I don't do that. I don't do the flow part. Now I understand the flow, and now I mastered. Like, it's almost like I teach people how to be like the, how do you call it? Like surfers, like how to be pro surfers. But first I had to do it for myself, and I had to understand, because I'm like, dude, if you don't tell me how to stand up, I don't believe my body will just figure it out magically, and it drove me crazy that those people will say like, oh well, just do it, just accept, no, let's go dance together. I'm like, okay.
So I teach a lot of technical stuff, and I'm always teaching. I call the mechanics and the semantics. So the semantics is how things behave, and then the mechanics is how that's implemented, right? And so I like to teach the semantics as much as I can, because if you can recognize behavior and you can understand how things behave, you can start to predict what's going to happen next. There's many ways to implement that, right? So if you get too stuck on the mechanics, sometimes you're if you only learn the mechanics and not the semantics, and somebody changes the mechanics, everything you just learned was
It
lost.
becomes useful. Yeah.
It
Useless,
becomes
sorry.
useless now because the mechanics change. But the semantics are really never supposed to change, or if they do, you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the truth, quote unquote. And so that's what I've been studying, the semantics, not necessarily the mechanics, because a lot of people will tell you the mechanics, but it's monkey see, monkey do, right? And all religions will teach you the mechanics too, right? Except it's really monkey see, monkey do. It's like, I don't know, like I think maybe somebody who could see energy figured out how to do it, and they're like, okay, we all do that, right? And they never question it. And I'm like, okay, maybe you should question it. I question everything. I'm like, why are we doing this? And now that I see energy, now that I understand how to use energy, how to manipulate energy, if you want to call it that, now I can tell you why they do it the way they do it. But they don't even know. And of course, they cannot teach you, right? They're like, oh, you just have to believe and do it. And I'm like, I'm not that kind of person. Thank you very much.
Well, you have your own mechanics for this sort of stuff. Like
Yes.
at some point there has to be an implementation. You just can't say this is how the system's going to behave and walk away. Like somebody's got to implement it at some point.
No, for sure, for sure. So the empower method is my form of mechanics, and I can tell you there's other methods that work. I, I'm not saying that I have the end all be all. I'm saying I have a method that works, and I am developing new methods that work. That's what I do, but that's because I fully understand the semantics, because I understand how it works, right? And to me, it was like years and years and years of spiritual practice plus a near death experience plus lots and lots of years of training through the clients that I've been having, right? Because every problem I solve, like I'm obsessed with solving problems, right? So if somebody comes with an incurable disease or an unsolvable problem, I obsess until it's solved. I'm like, my commitment to my clients is that I will solve your problem, like no matter what, right? I mean, okay, I will not solve their problem. They will solve their problems by themselves, but I will guide them. But I will not stop until we have a solution. If they don't stop, I don't stop, right? I have a guy like, I mean, I admire my clients because they have to go through some really heavy lifting, because I'm like, yep, just do that. But because of all the training I have, I can switch techniques on them every week or two, right? And I'm like, okay, let's try the results of this and combine this and combine this. And they don't even have to know exactly the mechanics. They just know that eventually it works. But it's because I have studied so much.
They need to know the semantics. If you don't have the semantics, you don't know what the behavior of these things are supposed to be.
Yeah, and that's what I teach them. And then the mechanics, I don't worry too much until I find something that really works for them, and then I teach it very well, right? But I don't know, like as I said, there's like 100 different methods. Like we were talking about one of my favorite methods, the radical forgiveness by Colin Tipping. Well, that's a mechanic, right? The guy knows how to do this mechanic really well, and it just came to him, like beautiful, beautiful body of work, right? And it's it works. It really works. It works really well.
You need to write the engineering guide to all this stuff for people like me, where you
Maybe.
lay it out in an engineering way. Like here are the semantics, and now here are some different implementations, right? The mechanics of how to make that behavior come to like. I would love to read that book, right? Because it wouldn't be all wishy-washy, get naked in the moonlight kind of thing. It would be like a real technical sort of engineering style book on, and I think it would bring it to life in a much more concrete way.
I feel that I'm at the stage where I'm ready to start writing. For years, people have been asking me to write, and I wrote, for the business. Like I wrote a couple books, so I become a best-selling author, quote unquote, right? So I can have that in my credential.
Writing is hard. Writing is hard. I'm burnt out on it too.
Now I'm starting to feel that I know what I'm doing. I feel like a lot of pieces came together, and now I'm at the stage where I'm ready to write the big book about my story. I never want to write the book about my story until now, because I always felt, well, okay, but maybe because I'm healing and accepting, I'm like, I used to think that if anybody knew my story, they will never want to talk to me again because I'm so broken.
We're all broken, Maria, in one way or another. Everybody's got imposter syndrome. If you don't, I think then you have a problem. I think, I try to tell I try to tell the kids this, right? You can live your entire life in a room and nothing will happen. Nothing good will happen, nothing bad will happen. But you can't have the really big highs if you don't have the really big lows. And so you've got to be out there. But I promise it will all balance out if you're making good choices. It's all about the choices you're making. So
And I want to say something. If we keep adding quote unquote love, I call it units of love, then actually it balances out positive. So it's almost like I call it like we have a bank account in the universe. So when we do good things, it goes into our debits, credits, yeah, whatever. And then if
it goes into the savings account.
yeah, into the savings account, and then the other one goes into the uh,
You're pulling out. Yeah, I see what you're saying. You got credits and debits, and hopefully,
so if you keep adding to the credits, they keep adding up, and so then you can definitely withdraw. Because a lot of us, what they do, and I've seen this over and over and over again, like I remember now I see karma after my near-death experience. So when I see somebody, I'm like, oh, you have really good karma, and then I look at what they do with it, with their lives, right? People who have good karma take life for granted. It's sad, but they do. And so when, like when everything came and everything was easy, and then you never took a minute of gratitude in you, then who are you? You're not a very good human, are you? And so I always say, hey, it doesn't matter what you have, as long as you keep adding. And it feels sometimes like a losing cause, right? Because, well, imagine somebody like me. It took me decades of credits until I got to the point where I can have some withdrawals now and have a good life. But the one thing is that every time we go through the same circle, it becomes easier. And I've had whatever happened in China happened in Malaysia a few years before, right? But back then it was like, oh, why are they treating me like this? And what is going on? And I went into hiding, kind of like what you're saying. Don't do the hiding. I did it for years, right? And then I did the Facebook, and then my Facebook became super popular. So I was like, I go back into hiding because now people started attacking me. There was this guy who sent me like a picture of people burning a woman, probably because they thought she was a witch. And so I thought, oh my God, they're going to burn me alive. So I went into hiding, right? But that's when we give up. The trick is to not give up. The trick is to keep trying no matter what. Because at the end of the day, they can do nothing to you. What are they going to do? Kill you? Okay, great. Other side is much better. No problem.
and I've also developed this philosophy of just keeping positive energy around me at this point. If you are going to be negative, or people that I love, even my kids start being negative, I'm like, stop, right? That negative energy is just going to bring everything down. You got to keep things, just stay positive, stay positive.
I had heard of a story from Oprah. So Oprah has these big parties and she invites very positive people. And she has literally energy police. So she literally has people going around the parties and listening. So I heard that from a lady who was kicked out of one of her parties. And she said, I went there and it was pure negativity and they kicked me out and said, you're not welcome here. Because she said, I have a big job to do in this world and I don't have time for negative people. I don't have time to waste. So if you're negative, don't be around me. And I love that.
I agree with that 100%. I agree with that 100%. You stay positive, you feel lighter. I don't know. You feel lighter too.
Absolutely. And it's kind of funny. Like I don't, my mother is still alive and I take care of her. So sometimes, like she will be in another room of the house, right? And I'll be like, stop thinking bad thoughts, right? Because I can feel the energy dropping. She's like,
Yeah,
what is this like? She's like, are you like the thinking police? I'm like, yeah.
that's hilarious. All right, we got like another 5 or 6 minutes here, and I want to kind of get back to what you're doing today again, like how I was able to even get you on the show. That's really cool. So come back now that it's been almost an hour and a half. Come back to again kind of what you're doing today and and we've talked a little bit about wanting to write a book, but let's get back to kind of today.
Yeah, yeah. So what I do today is I'm a leadership coach. So I work with leaders in organizations that want to develop the abilities of people. So we all look for money, but money comes from our abilities, and especially in business. And so I work with people to kind of remove that negativity, help them let go of that negativity, and increase the positivity, if we want to call it that, so they can do better. And then also to become aware, like one of my clients calls me the um, blind spot doctor, to become aware of the things we don't see, because we do things without knowing that we do them. So I help leaders see those things, because that literally translates into the bottom line.
Let me ask you. So companies are paying you to train people that are in like executive.
Yeah, so usually executive roles, but I've also worked with middle management, and they change their attitude. So I call what I do inspired leadership, and they what I'm here to do is create the most extraordinary versions. So create extraordinary teams, extraordinary leaders, and extraordinary teams. So because it's not just the leader, it's also the team that matters. Every single person in the team.
Okay, I own a business. Okay, the thought that I would invest money in this seems really foreign to me. Like,
Yes, I know.
why am I doing this as a company? Why am I investing this kind of money? Can't I just hire somebody who already has the skill set?
Yes and no. Yes and no. It's extremely expensive. So turnover is extremely expensive. And also, people will have the skill sets, right? So people hire now we hire for skill sets. We don't hire for character. And actually, it really matters what the character of every person is. So this character building, if you want to call it that, is truly valuable and important. And it really changes. And it actually saves a lot of money, because if you hire somebody who has the character and no knowledge, then you have to train them.
I do have to do a lot of two things with my business, right? I'll run a team, and every once in a while, I'll have somebody on my team who I know is a good person, but they have no training in being a good person. In other words, they don't know how to communicate with other team members, and I have to literally have hard conversations with them. And when I have my first hard conversation with them, that what you said was rude, you can't say it like that, and two things are going to happen. They're either going to push back, and I'm going to be like, we're done, or they're going to apologize, and I'm going to say, okay, now I'm going to teach you.
Yes. And that's the opportunity to do it, right?
Yeah, right. And now you end up with a better person, uh, 3, 4, 5, 6 months from now.
Yes. And a more productive person as well. Because if those people, like, they have been doing what they just did in a big way, in a smaller way every day, you just don't know, because it's not disruptive enough. You notice it when there's a crisis, but it's been happening every day. I can promise you that, because we are run by our traumas. We are run by our dark side. We don't know that, but we are. And so when we take our little blindfold out and we see our blind spots, then we're like, oh, wow. Every time somebody comes, I don't trust them. I think they're stealing from me. So I protect myself by hiding whatever I want to hide. And so now everything's hidden in ways that nobody can find, and there's no organization, right? It may seem simple, but it's always happening every day.
I know for myself that I wasn't born with the knowledge I have today. I started working with some women and like um, I started working with some women in some organizations. And my first month, I'm so grateful for them because my first month it was a constant, Bill, you can't do that. Bill, you can't say that. And they weren't getting angry at me like any other woman was getting angry at me and I didn't notice it, but they were teaching me. Like allowed me to be in a safe place, a safe space where they'd be like, Bill, no, no, no. And I'd be like, why? And I felt like a real dumbass at some point going, how come I don't know this? And now I do, and I can teach and train other men actually, which is part of what I do now, right? Um, but if you don't give somebody the opportunity to learn, because I think most people don't want to be.
In a non-judgment way, I think what you said is key, in a non-judgmental way, because when you're being judged, you go defensive and you hear nothing. So it's not just knowing what to say, it's also knowing how to say it, right?
Yeah. I just went through that with some people that are running a conference who had problems. And every time I'd start to talk about it, they'd want to defend themselves. And I said, stop defending yourself. We're past that, right? Like you listen to what I'm saying, right? And absorb it. So I love the idea that you have somebody like yourself who's able to come in and do this professionally.
No, because seriously, because I've done it so many times, like I know how to do it, but it's not obvious. Like, even though I know where I want to go, like it took me years and years and years to figure out how to get there without breaking everything in the middle, right? Because as I said, I always tell people, you'll be mad at me, but it has nothing to do with me. But people will get mad at me, and then I'll go defensive myself. So that was not very productive, but it takes time. And I almost like, I wish I would get to that one point in my life where I can train others to do what I do, because I feel that it's really, really important to have this skill set to be able to resolve. Well, it's almost resolving conflict without conflict ever happening.
Yeah, for me, it's giving somebody an opportunity who wants to grow, to learn how to be a better person, and give them the skill set to do that, because it helps them even beyond this job. You're helping this person for life because they carry that with them wherever they go.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's not something I take for granted, and I am very, very grateful. And I can tell you right now that I am still learning.
But how does your program work? Is there so many hours a week you're meeting with somebody, or do you wait until something happens?
So I have some classes that people can take. I do training where I will go for a certain number of hours, or I sometimes, especially with executives, I will work with them for a period of time, because it's extremely hard to help somebody who is running the show, right? Because they do not want to be vulnerable for 1 minute. And so gaining first few meetings is gaining their trust and knowing that I'm not going to hurt them. I'm not going to betray them. I'm not going to, because they need to show me their underbelly. And, I see it anyway because of energy, but they need to know that I see it without feeling that threatened that I see it. And then we can work on it, because otherwise they're defend.
Well, my guess is their first thing is, I'm going to get fired. That's why I'm here. This is like stage one of getting fired. I can imagine people thinking that. Like, they're just building up the documentation, and I better be real nice to Maria, because at the end of the day, my job is in her hands. Like, you got to fight that to get somebody to realize that you're there to help them. You're not there to hurt. Yeah, that's tough.
It is. And over the years I've gotten better at it, and it's still a struggle every time. It's almost like I know the dance and I still have to dance it anyway. It's like I wish there was a shortcut, but there's not, because people are people.
You could tell them, even with the person that hired you, we're here to help you. It's still in the back of your head. It's going to be like,
And it's almost like it takes a while for them to trust me, right? To know that I'm not going to hurt them. And most of my business comes from referrals so far, right? Because it's really, really hard. It's almost like they don't, like some people say, we don't know how you did it, but just do the same.
how did you get your first gig? We're out of time, but I don't care. How did you get your first gig? I'm gonna hold you for like another 5 minutes. Okay. I'm curious how you got your first gig doing this, because I find those stories, like I can remember the very first corporate class I taught in programming. Like, and that's, at that point you got your first one. How did you get your first gig doing this?
Actually, it was a referral for me because I had a client for a personal training. Not personal training exercise, but she had come. I was working in a retreat in Bali, and she had met me, and then she had a health problem, and then it sort of disappeared overnight. And then she's like, "I don't know what you did, but." Um, And then so she became my client, and then she referred to her brother, who happened to be a big time CEO.
I think it takes a special leader to say, I'm going to train others. It's again, it's so easy to just hire fast, fire fast, move on.
Yes, yes. And it's also like it takes a while, right? And it sounds like so difficult because in this moment, in the moment when it's happening, it becomes so impossibly difficult, right? You're like, why am I even going through this? Isn't there an easier way? And I do want to say that unfortunately there is not. Unfortunately there is not. And that's like the one thing that in Buddhism, like I'm in Thailand, it's a Buddhist country, and there's the four precepts of Buddhism. Life is suffering. Precept number one: first you have to accept this life sucks. and and then they say, well, there's an end to suffering, and the end to suffering is this eightfold path, right, of Buddhism, the holy sacred eightfold path. But they first start by telling you the bad news, and the reason is that we are here by design in order to learn. And it's almost like I used to believe that if only I did this, I will get there, right? But it doesn't happen this way. It's not like if only I do this, I will get happy. No, no, no. You are happy, and then you do whatever you want to be happy. It's sort of like happiness is not something you achieve; it's something you are. It's a very different philosophy. I used to, I remember my first degree at MIT, I was sitting at the Killian Court. So like that's a big corridor of MIT. Infinite Corridor is like this big corridor in one of the buildings, right? We call it the Infinite Corridor. And I was sitting there and I was feeling completely empty because I was like, okay, so now what? Right? Up to that point, it was so hard getting there. And then I read that a lot of the astronauts will have this super big bout of depression after coming, after going to the moon, because they're like, okay, getting to the moon was so impossibly hard. Nobody gets it, but the ones who got it, now what? Right? Because if you were expecting your life to be solved when you got that, it doesn't happen that way. It's not external, it's internal. But if you're looking for the external validation, you keep doing these extraordinary things, and then you're like, okay, now what? Right? Because at the end of the day, it's still you. You're still there.
Now what? What's next? Okay, so we're out of time. This was I could talk to you again for another hour, but we gotta shut this down. I want you to write my engineering book, okay? Write me my engineering book. I'll be the first one to read it. I
Well,
think that would be
thank you.
a
Thank you.
fascinating way to. I don't think anyone's ever done it that way, so it would be super interesting.
Well, maybe we can collaborate on that. I will be super interested in discussing that at one point if you're interested. Because I feel like I feel that for me, I take things for granted at this point. Like it's been so many years that I would love the collaboration with somebody like you who's like keep asking me the questions because I can give you the answers. I just don't know the questions you may have.
I'm not even sure what all the questions are, but for sure, if you end up deciding like I want to work on this project, then ping me.
Oh yeah, no, I am serious. Like I always start projects based on conversations like this. I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. Sure, let's do that. So yeah, let's get together on a separate call and then we'll discuss this. That will be fun. Because I feel that you asked me a question that's extremely important. You said, well, what if you, because you're not the only person who says, I don't get it. Nobody gets it. I don't get it either. As I said, I had to prove it over and over and over and over and over and over again until I was like, okay, I think I can trust it. And then what? I did it again. I was like, okay, let's prove it again a few more thousand times just to make sure it works.
If anybody wants to get in touch with you after listening to the show, what's the best way? We'll put it in the show notes. What's the best way for people to reach out?
Um, I'm gonna say by email will be the easiest. Like I have lots of stuff on the website, but just send me an email to Maria Kellis at mariakellis.com and just reference the show so we know where you're coming from, and then I'll be my team will put you in. We'll send you one of the calendars, and then you can get time to meet me. I'm still open to meeting people. I'm fascinated by people. I find that maybe until the end of my life, every story is unique. And that's what makes my job so interesting. I never get bored because, yeah, I kind of know the principles, the semantics as we were speaking, but the mechanics are different for every person, right? And it actually, I love helping people find the mechanics that work for them. because I spent so much time with people telling me what to do without knowing who I am. And I think that that's the really difficult step. It's like, okay, what works for you as opposed to what worked for me? Like what worked for me is different than what is going to work for you.
Yeah, I'm right where with you now. I'm more fascinated by people and their stories and choices and decisions they've made, and then kind of recalculating all that in my head at the same time, right? Because it's not just that you're also helping others, you're also able to absorb that information even for yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's an honor. I always tell people, thank you for choosing to work with me. It's an honor because it really is. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to do every single case. It's fun. That's why I love my job.
All right, this was fascinating, but we've got to stop.
I know. Okay, we're done. Time out. It was wonderful. So again, if you want to contact me, Maria Kellis at mariakellis.com.
So this is Maria and Bill signing off from the On Labs podcast, and we hope to see everybody again real soon.